Huffines. And here in the legislature, a lot of time we have to be concerned about, we have a good intention, but sometimes the way the bill is passed, we end up with some unintended consequences. So I think I have a real life scenario that's very close to us. Currently, a CHL concealed handgun license holder who comes to the Capitol, who's had their background checked and has all the safety training. These are the law-abiding citizens that we're talking about. When they come to the Capitol, they can go through the short line and show their CHL, and they get in quite quickly. So I guess the scenario I think that's very close to us, if we have a person who really does intend harm, and they come to the Capitol, and they're open carrying, they go through the regular line, they don't go through the CHL line, and they walk through the metal detector, and the metal detector goes off. What happens at that point if this amendment goes on?
Well, the police would be able to do whatever they need to do.
Well, what do they need to do at that point?
Check him to see if he's got the CHL license. Or
but that person at that point is not doing anything illegal. There's nothing unlawful about coming to the Capitol. But this person really, in their mind, has an intent of doing evil, but an officer can't tell that by looking at them. But now they've gone through the metal detector. The gun is clearly visible. When it goes off, he turns around, and the officer can see he's got a gun on his belt. Can the officer, if this amendment goes on, ask to see his concealed handgun license? And believe me, I'm a CHL person, I'm a gun guy, but I'm just trying to, how does this work?
Yes, I would say yes to your question. Because the officer needs to use his discretion to make sure that he's going to prevent the crime. Let me just point out a little question here, is that this isn't unprecedented. I mean, the courts have ruled around different appellate court cases that you cannot solely stop a CHL holder because of a suspicion of a crime he didn't commit. I mean, this amendment really does clarify it so that we don't get in a lot of litigation. I mean, you can't go violating people's Fourth Amendment rights. You can't go around solely stopping them for exercising something they've got a permit to do, a law-abiding citizen. It's no different, Senator, than if they can't go stop you driving your vehicle down the road unless they suspect a crime. Police are very good at having judgment and very good at assessing the situation.
So based on this person's appearance, you're saying that the metal detector goes off, that they'll have to make an assessment at that point as whether that person has any intention to do harm based on how their countenance looks or whatever. I'm just concerned. I mean, here at the Capitol, should we just go ahead and take the metal detectors down? Because at this point, can the metal detectors serve any purpose? Because I'm just reading the wording, and it says a peace officer may not make an investigatory stop or other temporary detention to inquire as to a person's possession of a handgun license solely because the person is carrying in a shoulder belt holster. So he walks through the regular line, the metal detector goes off, and it's very clearly he's open carrying. Does the DPS trooper at that point have the ability, if this amendment goes on, solely based on that,
yes,
to ask the question, do you have a license?
Yes.
And under what premise would he have that?
Because he didn't declare the license. The policeman would have a variety of reasons probably to ask him that.
Do you have to declare a license to come to the Capitol
Yeah,
if you have a
supposed
CHL?
to go. Yes, you're supposed
You
to.
don't have to go through that line.
You can go through the.
You don't
metal
have to go
detector.
through that line. I don't believe you do. There's a sign that says you must go through that line.
Yeah, CHL holders are supposed to present their licenses. They come in and they go around the line.
But if they
could
choose not to go through that
yeah.
line,
I'm not exactly sure of the.
if they choose not to go through that line, and the metal detector goes off, does the officer have a right to ask to see their CHL?
I would think so. Mm.
I just wonder, is there an amendment? I mean, I hear heightened security, those types of things. Is there maybe an amendment that we need to put on there that says something to the fact that in areas of heightened security where metal detectors are present, that they can indeed ask in that case. So I'm just concerned that you may, by passing this, the unintended consequence may be that we don't allow metal detectors. And so, I mean, I've got the Biohazard 4 Containment Lab down in Galveston as part of UTMB, where they're doing all kind of very high-level infectious disease studies and those types of things. And they have a metal detector there, and they have officers there, because this is a federal lab, and they have to have the highest of security. And so they have officers there, so people can come to that facility with open carry and walk through. And they don't have a CHL line. They just have a metal detector. So if that person comes in through that line, it goes off, they turn around and there's other facilities. I mean, a federal thing may have their own laws, and I'm just trying to find for the unintended consequence. So maybe there's an amendment to your amendment that we might need to put on that says something to the effect where there's a heightened security risk or something along those lines, to make it where we don't have the unintended consequence.
Well, good point, Senator. I would tell you this, that I think the law and the amendment speaks for itself when it says solely. So if they have other concerns, if the metal detector operator had other concerns, if he says that, this person could pose a risk to the area they're entering, then he has a right to ask for the license. If an officer has concern or suspicion of anything, he has a right to do whatever he needs to do to secure the situation, to ask for the license. So this isn't just that's what it's about. It's simply saying solely. So entering into a room with a metal detector or a building would be a good premise that he's trying to secure the situation. You have a right to ask.
Would you be willing to help me work on an amendment to make sure that's clear in this law?
I think it's pretty clear. I don't know how you can make it clearer than when you say solely. I mean,
I think you got some legal help coming.
With due respect, Senator, I appreciate your question. Yeah. I do feel like the amendment speaks for itself when it says solely. It's clear that it's solely about someone carrying. If the police have any reason to suspect or feel like their life or anyone else's life might be in danger, they would have the right to ask. They would be treated the same way as if you have any CHL.
If the sole reason why the medical detector goes off is because they're carrying a gun, would that allow them to ask any more questions beyond?
It would definitely depend on the judgment.
I'm sorry?
It definitely depends on the judgment of the officer of the situation. If he feels like that he needs to ask, he can ask.
Well, what other judgment would it cause me to do that? If they're dressed nicely, they've got a nice countenance on their face, they don't look like they're getting ready to go do a crime. I don't know if you've seen some of the people who've done some of these mass murders. I mean, for example, Whitman in the UT Tower, if you saw a picture of him, he didn't look deranged to anyone. Just look at him. I've seen the pictures of him. I was a young child at the time, but had a crew cut. I think it looked like his guy out of the Army. But he shot I don't know how many people from the UT Tower. So I'm concerned if you're in a situation like that where you have in your words, a more highly secure area that they can't even so much as ask based on this amendment.
No, if they feel like a crime's going to be committed or suspecting that a crime could be committed, they could ask.
But how do you do that?
It's the judgment of the officer, the same judgments they make every day on a lot of situations.
Well, back to I think y'all were talking about earlier, the guy getting ready to jaywalk or something. How does an officer know someone's about to do a crime before they've actually done it? I'm just trying to follow that's incredible judgment. That's almost like some kind of being able to see the future. I'm not following that.
No, that's why we have in our Constitution, you can't unreasonably stop and seize somebody.
But we have our Constitution, but we have metal detectors today. So how do we make these two work together? Because that's always been, I don't think anyone's ever said metal detectors are unconstitutional to walk through to go into a secure environment. Royce, you going to come over and help me too, or we're just going to...
I'm trying to hear him do that. I'm trying to hear everything.
Can I have some help here? Is there an extra lawyer on the floor?
Royce. Yeah, I'm going to yell. Royce is a good lawyer. What was the question again? I'm sorry, Senator.
The idea that we have the Constitution today.
Yes.
And metal detectors are obviously searching people as they go through for particular items. I don't think anyone's ever rules a metal detector is unconstitutional. So they're used at, place where we require higher security, heightened security. They have these. So I'm just trying to figure out, having an officer be able to ask in an area of heightened security, do you have a license to carry that gun? Why that would be such a bad thing to put on this amendment.
I just don't think it's necessary. I really don't, because in a heightened security area, there's a reason to check. The reason to check is that it's a heightened security. So the officer would have a reasonable reason to ask you if you have a license.
Okay.
If you're in a crime scene, an officer has a reasonable request to say, hey, you got a license for that. I mean, they can say that if they think a crime's going to be is
well, in that case, a crime's already happened. I'm concerned about
order in the chamber, please.
I'm concerned about. Let's go back to the Capitol scenario again. Someone who intends to do harm walks through a non-metal detector because we don't have one anymore. They could do a lot of harm in a very short amount of time, and it'll be easy enough to catch the criminal at that point. But meanwhile, a number of people have been harmed because someone who shouldn't have had a gun was able to walk straight in here and do either one person or a number of people harm. And that bothers me. And I'm a gun person. I mean, I hunt, I have my CHL, I do all those things, but I don't want some people who don't qualify to carry a gun. For example, we've heard about the felons. I've worked on the health committee for a number of years. And I don't know if you've seen the numbers of mental health patients and how that number is growing in Texas. And I don't think those people should be carrying concealed, open, whatever. And that's why we have laws that you have background checks to make sure that they don't get a gun, because that's unsafe for everyone. And I think we can agree on that. I know you're not trying to say that.
Okay.
But the same person like that could be the one who walks in this Capitol and can't be asked about whether or not they've had that background check, and they could do a lot of harm. I could tell you many times I sat on the House floor, and frankly, last session on this chamber, when we had some pretty heated arguments going, and I must say, I feel somewhat like a fish in a barrel down here. And before we had metal detectors, there were times it was pretty scary. So for me, it gave me some satisfaction when we did finally install some metal detectors, because I've seen some pretty scary folks sit in that gallery, and they were very angry about what we were doing. And pre-metal detectors, it was a scary place, in my view. So in areas of heightened security, I think we ought to consider putting an amendment on here that allows them to ask a question, not just solely because they're carrying a gun, but because they're in an area of heightened security. So if you could just add that on there, I think you would help ease my concerns a lot.
I understand. I do want to point out if there's probable cause, and if someone's going through a metal detector and there's always going to be probable cause in a heightened security area to ask for the CHL license. You see what I'm saying? I mean, in other words, if you've got a reason, say that to ask, you can ask, but you can't ask if you don't have a reason.
Well, what if I'm an obstinate open carry person, and you so much as ask me, say, you can't ask me that. Why are you asking me that question?
Well, they
Because
could ask,
under the Huffines Amendment, as passed on House Bill 910, you can't ask me that question. And the officer says, I guess you're right.
it's just, the same thing would happen without the amendment because you're going to get in litigation if somebody is getting stopped solely because they're carrying and not for any other suspicious activity, whether it's a heightened security area or they want to see going into a ball game. You can't carry a CHL into certain areas, churches and courtrooms and things of that nature. Well, this would be the same. You can stop and check on that. I mean, this isn't about giving anyone any more permission to do anything they don't currently have. It's not about expanding the rights of a CHL holder in any way. It's simply about stating that the police can stop you for.
Okay. Now, Senator, I think I've been asked to kind of stand down because we're going to take a break, if that's correct. And so you and I can talk about this offline.
Sure, be happy to.